Could a world organization truly end all wars? Welcome to CSS Breakdown, book by book, Season 09, Episode 3, where we open Norman Lowe's Mastering Modern World History, 5th edition, to examine the ambitious journey of the League of Nations, an experiment in global peace that began with hope and ended in disappointment. Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of the 20th century's most fascinating and ultimately heartbreaking experiments for the League of Nations. Born from the sheer devastation of the First World War, it was this grand, idealistic attempt to prevent future global conflicts. But what exactly was this organization? How was it supposed to weave peace into a world so scarred by war? And why, despite all its lofty goals, did it eventually, well, falter so dramatically?
We're exploring Norman Lowe's insightful account, which really traces the League's trajectory. It starts from its formal launch, January 10th, 1920, headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, then through those early hopeful years into the severe trials of the 1930s, and finally its quiet dissolution in 1946. It's a compelling narrative, really, of soaring idealism colliding head-on with the brutal realities of international power politics.
So let's unpack the very origins of this ambitious idea. Now, American President Woodrow Wilson often gets the credit as the main architect. But Lowe points out it wasn't just his brainchild. It was really a coming together of similar suggestions from various world statesmen. Who were some of these key figures, and what was the shared vision that sparked such a, well, revolutionary concept?
You're absolutely right. It wasn't just Wilson. We see names like Lord Robert Cecil from Britain, Jan Smuts of South Africa, Leon Bourgeois from France. They'd all put forward remarkably detailed plans for some kind of global peace body. Wilson's genius, though, or perhaps his key contribution, was his unwavering insistence that the League's covenant, that's essentially its founding charter and rulebook, be embedded directly within every single peace treaty ending the war.
Ah, okay. So it wasn't just a suggestion tacked on afterwards.
Exactly. It was a non-negotiable part of the peace settlement itself. This guaranteed its actual creation. It wasn't just left to chance.
That's a crucial point. It wasn't just an idea. It was baked into the very fabric of the post-war world. So, with this new body established, what were its two core aims? What grand promises did it make to a world desperate for peace?
Its primary aim was to maintain peace through what they called collective security. A pretty radical idea at the time.
Collective security. What did that mean in practice?
The idea was, if one state attacked another, all member states would act together. They'd use either economic pressure, like sanctions, or, if necessary, military force to restrain the aggressor.
Okay, strength in numbers.
Precisely. The second, equally vital aim was to foster international cooperation, not just on peace, but across a whole spectrum of economic and social challenges. Things like health, labor, refugees.
Right, but here's the fundamental question it immediately raised, didn't it? Could such a high-minded, truly global vision genuinely work when individual nations still held so much power and, let's be honest, prioritized their own interests?
That's the million-dollar question. Could this idealistic vision actually function in the real world of power politics?
A bold vision like that, as you say, needs a robust structure to even attempt to bring it to life. How was the League actually set up to manage these vast ambitions? What were its key components, its organizational chart, if you like?
Well, Lowe describes a surprisingly comprehensive setup. At its height, around 1926, the League had 55 member states. That's up significantly from the initial 42. It basically had 5 main organs or parts.
Okay, what were they?
First, imagine a kind of global parliament that was a general assembly. Representatives from all member states met annually. Each country got one vote, and they decided general policy, handled finances, that sort of thing.
One country, one vote. Sounds fair.
On the surface, yes. But here was a significant structural quirk. All major decisions required unanimity. Everyone had to agree.
Wait, unanimity. So essentially one no vote could derail everything, even with dozens of nations involved. That sounds like a recipe for potential gridlock.
It absolutely was, and it proved to be a massive hurdle down the line. While it did give smaller and medium-sized states a voice, which was important, that unanimity rule was problematic.
Okay, so the Assembly for Broad Policy. What else?
Then there was the Council. This was smaller, more like an executive body, meeting much more frequently, at least 3 times a year. It had 4 permanent members initially: Britain, France, Italy, and Japan, plus a growing number of non-permanent members elected periodically.
And its job?
Its job was to tackle specific political disputes as they flared up, real crisis management. But crucially, its decisions also required unanimity among its members present.
Unanimity again. And who are those permanent members meant to be originally?
Well, what's fascinating and frankly crippling here is that the USA was intended to be a fifth permanent member. Their absence, because the U.S. Senate rejected the treaty, left a gaping hole right from the start. Not just financially, but psychologically, symbolically.
A huge missing piece. Okay, so Assembly Council. What about legal issues?
For legal disputes between states, they established the Permanent Court of International Justice. This was based at The Hague, made up of 15 judges from different nationalities. It started work in 1922.
And was it effective?
Actually, yes. By 1939, it had successfully resolved 66 legal disputes. Lowe notes it gained immense respect for establishing this idea of a generally accepted code of legal practice in international relations. It showed law could play a role beyond just national borders.
Okay, that's a positive. And the day-to-day running of things. The admin.
That fell to the Secretariat. This was essentially the League's international civil service. Think of it managing all the paperwork, preparing agendas for meetings, writing reports, making sure decisions were actually communicated and hopefully carried out. It was staffed by people from over 30 countries and noted for its high quality of organization and administration. It was the engine room.
Right, the bureaucracy that makes things happen. And finally,
and often overlooked but really important, were the numerous commissions and committees. These were the real workhorses, set up to address specific, pressing global problems. Things like mandates over former colonies, military affairs, but also international labor standards, health initiatives, child welfare, women's rights, drug trafficking, refugees. A huge range.
so these were tackling the practical, on-the-ground issues.
Exactly. They weren't always headline-grabbing, but their practical work laid vital groundwork for future international cooperation in these fields. They were really about that second aim, fostering cooperation.
So, on paper, it really did appear to be this comprehensive, remarkably thoughtful framework for global governance, designed to cover all bases from grand policy and crisis management to legal arbitration and specific humanitarian work. The idea was that all disputes threatening war would be submitted to the League.
That was the vision. And any member breaking the covenant, the rules, would face collective action. It truly was an audacious, almost utopian vision for its time.
Okay, so despite its eventual tragic outcome, Lowe makes a strong case that it's unfair to just dismiss the League as a total failure. What were some of its early concrete achievements, especially in that promising decade of the 1920s?
Well, as we touched on, many of those committees and commissions achieved genuinely valuable results. They fostered international cooperation in ways previously unheard of.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Take the International Labor Organization, ILO. Under its dynamic French socialist director, Albert Thomas, it successfully pushed governments worldwide to adopt better labor conditions.
Like what sort of conditions?
Things we almost take for granted now in many places: maximum working hours, minimum wages, sickness, and unemployment benefits. This had a tangible, positive impact on millions of ordinary people's daily lives. It showed international standards could work.
That's a huge systemic impact. What about the humanitarian side? Helping those most directly affected by the war and its aftermath. That must have been a massive task.
Absolutely enormous. The refugee organization, led by the famous Norwegian explorer Fridtjof Nansen, tackled the monumental problem of hundreds of thousands of prisoners of war stranded in Russia after the war. They managed to get about 500,000 of them home.
Incredible logistical feat.
It really was.
Yeah.
And later, after 1933, they provided crucial aid to thousands fleeing Nazi persecution in Germany, issuing the Nansen Passport, which gave refugees an identity document.
And health. You mentioned that too.
Yes, the health organization did critical work investigating the causes and prevention of epidemics. It was particularly successful in containing a typhus epidemic in Russia that seriously threatened to spread right across Europe. Global health cooperation really got a boost here.
So, real practical successes. What about the political side? Did it manage to actually prevent any conflicts in those early days?
It did, yes. Several political disputes were successfully referred to the League in the early 1920s, and remarkably, its decisions were accepted in almost all cases.
Such as?
Well, there was the Allen Islands dispute between Finland and Sweden. The League ruled they should go to Finland. The tricky partitioning of Upper Silesia between Germany and Poland after a plebiscite. It successfully pressured Greece to withdraw from Bulgaria after some border clashes in 1925. And it ruled in favor of Iraq, which was under a British mandate, over Turkey regarding the oil-rich Mosul province.
So it wasn't just European issues.
No, even disputes far afield in South America, one between Peru and Colombia, another between Bolivia and Paraguay, found resolution through the League's mediation.
It truly sounds like a period of genuine promise, almost a golden age for this new global body. Jan Smuts, the South African statesman we mentioned earlier, was so moved, he remarked in 1930, that they were witnessing one of the great miracles of history.
He did say that, yes. There was a real sense of optimism in the air during the 1920s.
So what does this all mean for the League's initial perceived success? Were those early years a true indicator of its future potential, or was there something else going on?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. And Lowe highlights a crucial caveat, a sort of fine print to all these successes.
Okay.
None of these disputes, the ones it successfully resolved, seriously threatened world peace. They were mostly between smaller powers. More importantly, none of the League's decisions went against a major state that might have actually challenged its verdict forcefully.
Ah, so it hadn't really been tested against a powerful nation willing to defy it.
Precisely. In fact, the League was twice overruled, quite pointedly, by a rival body, the Conference of Ambassadors, based in Paris. This happened over Vilna in 1920, which Poland seized from Lithuania.
The League told Poland to leave.
Yes, but Poland refused, and the ambassadors eventually awarded Vilna to Poland. And even more significantly, the Corfu incident in 1923.
What happened there?
Italy, under Mussolini, bombarded and occupied the Greek island of Corfu after an Italian general was killed on the Greek border. Greece appealed to the League, but Mussolini basically refused to recognize the League's authority in the matter.
And the outcome.
The Conference of Ambassadors stepped in again, largely sided with Italy, and ordered Greece to pay compensation. The League made no effective response to either of these acts of defiance. Looking back, Lowe says that was not a promising sign for its future strength when faced with real aggression from a major power.
That point about major powers is absolutely critical. It brings to mind Lord Balfour's famous question back in 1923. What would happen if a powerful state were to challenge the League on a matter of major importance? Let's truly unpack the inherent weaknesses that made the League so vulnerable, even beyond those early warning signs.
Lowe identifies several fundamental issues right from the start. Firstly, it was too closely linked with the Versailles Treaties.
How is that a weakness?
Well, it made the League seem less like a neutral, universal body for peace, and more like an organization designed by the victorious powers Britain and France, mainly to uphold a peace settlement that many nations viewed as deeply flawed or unfair.
Like Germany, for instance.
Exactly. Germany resented the treaty massively. But also, nations like Italy felt slighted by their territorial gains after the war. And the treaty created new states like Czechoslovakia and Poland with significant German minorities, which became sources of friction. So the League was seen by some as defending an unjust status quo.
And of course, the elephant in the room. The U.S., a key player in its very conception, famously never joined. How much of a blow was that?
It was a serious blow, as Lowe puts it, a devastating one, really. Their rejection by the U.S. Senate in March 1920 deprived the League of immense psychological weight, global legitimacy, and not least vital financial power and potential enforcement capability.
And it wasn't just the U.S. missing, was it?
No. On top of that, other important powers were simply not involved for crucial early years. Germany wasn't admitted until 1926. Soviet Russia, later the USSR, was initially ostracized and only became a member in 1934, just as things were really deteriorating. So imagine trying to solve global problems when three of the world's most significant players, the U.S., Germany, and the USSR, are on the outside looking in for much of its formative period.
It really hamstrings the idea of a truly global league. And that Conference of Ambassadors you mentioned seemed to be a persistent competitor, actively undermining the League's authority at times.
It absolutely was. The competition from the Conference of Ambassadors in Paris became a real source of weakness and embarrassment. This older body, a hangover from the war, lingered on and often took precedence, especially when major powers were involved.
As we saw with Vilna and Corfu.
Exactly. In the Corfu incident, Mussolini openly defied the League's competence, even threatened to withdraw Italy entirely. The ambassadors stepped in, bypassed the League and essentially sided with Italy, ordering Greece to pay the full compensation demanded. While League supporters initially dismissed these incidents as mere teething troubles, they were stark warnings about where real power lay.
So beyond these external factors, the link to Versailles, missing members, rival bodies, were their internal weaknesses built right into its own covenant, its very rules?
Undeniably. And this is perhaps the most critical flaw. It raises the question, how could the League enforce collective security when it was so incredibly difficult to achieve unanimous decisions, and it had no military force of its own?
No army. How was collective security supposed to work then?
Well, Article 16 of the Covenant expected member states to supply troops if the Council asked for them to act against an aggressor. But there was no obligation. And worse, a resolution passed in 1923 basically watered this down, stating that each member could decide for itself whether to actually fight in a crisis.
So it was optional.
Pretty much. Lowe notes this clearly made nonsense of the idea of collective security. If you can just opt out when things get tough, the whole system collapses.
Was there any attempt to fix that? To give it more teeth?
There was a genuine attempt, yes. The 1924 Geneva Protocol. This was proposed to strengthen the covenant, basically pledging members to accept arbitration in disputes and automatically come to the aid of victims of aggression.
Sounds sensible. What happened?
It was rejected, crucially by Britain. The newly elected conservative government, reflecting perhaps a strong pacifist public opinion at home and concerns about its own military weakness and imperial commitments, refused to sign it.
Wow. So even the major powers supposedly leading the League weren't willing to commit fully to its core principle.
Exactly. Critics were absolutely right. The League was fundamentally lacking teeth. The prevailing attitude among many members, especially when it came to potentially costly actions, was simply to leave it to the others. Britain's rejection of the protocol really showed that even its key supporters were hesitant, often preferring to sign separate treaties like the Locarno Treaties outside the League framework.
So these inherent weaknesses, the unanimity rule, no army, key members missing or uncommitted, didn't immediately doom the League in the relatively stable 1920s, but they were deeply embedded cracks, ready to shatter when real pressure was applied.
Precisely. The foundation was shaky from the start.
So, if the 1920s, despite those cracks, had shown a glimmer of promise, the 1930s became the decade where these inherent weaknesses were brutally, inescapably exposed. What was the catalyst for this dramatic shift, this downward spiral?
The entire situation really began to spiral out of control, as Lowe describes it, with the onset of the Great Depression in 1929. This wasn't just an economic crisis, it had profound political consequences.
How so?
This global economic downturn brought unprecedented unemployment, poverty, and plummeting living standards to nearly every country. That widespread suffering and insecurity, in turn, fueled the rise of extreme right-wing nationalist and aggressive governments. We see this dramatically in Japan, with the military gaining more influence, and in Germany, with the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party.
And these new regimes weren't interested in playing by the League's rules.
Not at all. Along with Mussolini's fascist Italy, which was already flexing its muscles, these new powers had no intention of keeping to the rules of international cooperation and peaceful dispute resolution. They sought solutions through national strength, expansion, and ultimately conquest, not through negotiation in Geneva. The Depression made countries more inward-looking, more protectionist, and less willing to cooperate or take risks for collective security.
Let's break down the major incidents that fundamentally, irrevocably undermined the League's authority and ultimately its very existence during this disastrous decade. Where did the real challenges begin?
The first major blow, a truly significant test of that collective security principle, was the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931. Japan had long-standing interests there, manufactured an incident, and occupied the entire Chinese province.
And China appealed to the League.
It did. China was a fellow League member. The League investigated, through the Lytton Commission, condemned Japan's actions and ordered them to withdraw.
And Japan's response?
A defiant refusal, followed by their withdrawal from the League altogether in March 1933. They just walked out.
What could the League do? Sanctions? Military action?
That was the problem. Britain and France, the key powers, were still reeling from their own severe economic problems caused by the Depression. They were simply unwilling to apply meaningful economic sanctions, which might hurt their own trade or risk a war in the Far East, especially without any chance of American help. The U.S., remember, wasn't a member.
So Japan got away with it?
Essentially, yes. What this showed the world, loud and clear, was that a determined major power could successfully defy the League and suffer no real consequences. Its prestige was seriously damaged, though perhaps not yet fatally. But the precedent was terrible.
A bad omen. And around the same time, efforts at disarmament were also collapsing.
They were. The failure of the World Disarmament Conference, which met in Geneva from 1932 to 1933, was another profound disappointment and sign of the changing times.
What went wrong there?
Germany, still bound by the severe military restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles, understandably requested arms equality with the other major powers. They argued, either you disarm down to our level or let us rearm up to yours.
Seemed logical.
It did, but France, deeply fearful of a resurgent Germany, refused to allow it and managed to get the decision postponed. This gave Hitler, who had just come to power, the perfect excuse. He dramatically withdrew Germany not only from the conference, but shortly after, from the League itself in October 1933. The message was clear. International cooperation on arms control was dead, and Germany was going its own way.
So first, Japan walks out, then Germany. The League is losing key players and failing major tests. But the most severe test, the one Lowe describes as the most serious blow to the League's prestige and credibility, came a couple of years later.
Absolutely. The Italian invasion of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, in October 1935 was truly the League's ultimate trial. This was a blatant act of aggression by one League member against another.
And how did the League respond this time? Did it learn from Manchuria?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the League did act more decisively than with Japan. It condemned Italy and, for the first time, actually imposed economic sanctions under Article 16.
Ah, so collective security in action.
Up to a point. Crucially, those sanctions were incomplete. They didn't include a ban on sales of vital resources like oil, coal, and steel to Italy. Britain and France feared that banning oil might provoke Mussolini into a wider war, or that he could get it from non-League members like the U.S. anyway.
So the sanctions were half-hearted.
Exactly. They were annoying to Italy, but not crippling. As a result, Italy easily completed the conquest of Abyssinia by May 1936. A few weeks later, the sanctions were quietly abandoned altogether. Mussolini had successfully, brazenly, flouted the League's authority, and it was absolutely devastating for its credibility.
And this disastrous outcome had wider, incredibly dangerous implications beyond just Italy and Abyssinia, didn't it? Sounds like it really paved the way for World War II.
It absolutely did. The results were catastrophic for global peace. First, Mussolini, who had initially been wary of Hitler, was annoyed by even the token sanctions imposed by Britain and France. This pushed him much closer to Hitler, leading to the formation of the Rome-Berlin axis shortly after.
So it united the aggressors.
In effect, yes. Second, small states completely lost faith in the League. If it couldn't protect a member state like Abyssinia from naked aggression by a major power, what hope did they have? Collective security seemed like a dead letter. And third, perhaps most importantly, Hitler watched all this unfold. Seeing the League's impotence, seeing Britain and France's reluctance to take firm action, he was emboldened.
To do what?
To openly violate the Treaty of Versailles. Just months before the Abyssinian crisis ended, in March 1935, he announced German rearmament and conscription. Then, in March 1936, while the League was still preoccupied with Italy, he took the massive gamble of sending German troops back into the demilitarized Rhineland.
A direct challenge to the post-war order and the League's response.
Silence. Neither of these blatant violations was even effectively raised at the League Council. Why? Largely because France and Britain were terrified that Hitler would simply reject any decision that went against Germany, and they were desperately reluctant to be forced into military action, which they felt unprepared for. Appeasement was beginning to take hold.
So after all these repeated acts of defiance by Japan, Germany, Italy, and the lack of decisive action from Britain and France, what does this all mean for the League's ultimate role in preventing World War II? Could it have done more?
Simply put, after 1935, the League as a serious force for maintaining peace was finished. It was never taken seriously again by the aggressor states, or even really by Britain and France, who increasingly pursued policies outside its framework. The real explanation for its failure wasn't necessarily its flawed structure or its idealistic aims, though those played a part. It was fundamentally a lack of political will from its leading members.
They weren't prepared to back it up.
Exactly. When aggressive states like Japan, Italy, and Germany openly defied it, the key members, especially France and Britain, were simply not prepared to support it, either by decisive economic measures or by military action. They were too preoccupied with domestic problems, too fearful of war, perhaps too lacking in military strength or resolve in the face of determined dictators. The League was only ever going to be as strong as the determination of its leading members to stand up to aggression, and that determination, Lowe concludes, was sadly lacking during the 1930s.
It's so easy and tempting, isn't it, to just dismiss the League as a complete and utter failure, especially since its primary aim, preventing another world war, wasn't achieved. But Lowe suggests, drawing on the work of historians like Ruth, that this verdict might be too harsh, too simplistic. How could we possibly view the League beyond its dramatic political failings? Is there another side to this story?
There is. Koenig compellingly argues, and Lowe seems to agree, that it was a bold step towards international cooperation which failed in some of its aims but succeeded comprehensively in others. It wasn't all about preventing war.
So where did it succeed?
Its very creation, she argues, marked an important step on the road to our contemporary global system of international organization. In essence, the United Nations, which we know today, and which did learn lessons from the League's failures, was explicitly built on the foundations of the League's experience.
So it was more than just a failure. It was an essential blueprint, a kind of first draft for global governance. What parts of its design and its work are still with us today, living on in the UN?
Many of its core structures were directly adopted or adapted. The UN's General Assembly, its Security Council, though with revised voting rules like the veto, and its International Secretariat were all clearly based on the League's organs.
And the court.
The UN International Court of Justice reproduced almost identically the League's Permanent Court of International Justice. The legal framework continued.
What about those commissions and committees doing the practical work?
That's perhaps the most remarkable legacy. The International Labor Organization, ILO, founded by the League to promote workers' rights, survived the League's collapse and is still operating today as a specialized agency of the UN. It's a direct institutional link. And many other crucial UN bodies like the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and the World Health Organization, WHO, built directly on the pioneering work, the experience, and sometimes even the personnel carried over from the League's agencies that tackled social, economic, and health issues before 1939.
So the groundwork laid in those less political areas really endured.
It absolutely did. Hennick's final point, which Lowe echoes, is crucial. Expectations for what the League might achieve politically, especially in preventing war between major powers, were far too high and completely unrealistic, given it had no army of its own and no way to actually compel member states to provide troops or enforce truly tough sanctions. Its enduring contribution, beyond the specific successes of its agencies, was providing the crucial first experimental phase for future global cooperation. It showed what might be possible, identified the pitfalls, promoted the idea of compromise and negotiation, and marked a dynamic, if flawed, step forward in how nations interact. It was a necessary failure, perhaps.
The League of Nations truly was an experiment in global peace, wasn't it? A grand and noble aspiration born from the unspeakable devastation of the First World War. It certainly had its moments of genuine success, particularly, as you say, in that vital humanitarian and social work that echoed long into the future. But it ultimately stumbled, tragically, when confronted by the aggressive pursuit of realpolitik, that stark focus on national interest and power politics over idealistic principles by major powers in the 1930s.
Its story highlights a crucial, enduring lesson for us today, I think. The true strength of any international body, whether it's the League or the UN or any other, rests not just on its rules, its structures, or its high ideals, but ultimately on the unwavering commitment and the political will of its most powerful members to actually uphold those principles, even when it's difficult or costly. Without that foundational commitment, even the most innovative blueprint for peace can, well, crumble into dust when tested.
So, if the League of Nations was indeed the essential blueprint, the necessary first experiment for modern international organizations, what lessons from its specific experience, its successes, and its failures do you think are still most critical for today's ongoing efforts at global peace and cooperation? Something for all of us to truly ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.